There is one major difference between Steve and Melanie. He was an asshole, and Melanie is not an asshole. There are two kinds of assholes. So one asshole is ego-driven. The mission-driven asshole is the person who wants to make the best computer, and he is not going to let anything stand in his way. That's the kind of asshole that Steve was. If you have to be an asshole, that's the kind of asshole to be. I don't even know how I came to be on your podcast. Anybody who wants me on their podcast, say yes. My first guest was Jane Goodall. And once you have Jane Goodall, the rest is kind of easy because nobody is going to question the quality of your podcast if you have Jane Goodall on it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Okay, let's do this.
Yeah. Your name has come up consistently over the last 5-6 years that I've been in the internet, online marketing business space. I think I would see you on Twitter, I would see you blog back in the days, I would see you with different interviews, like interviews with Gary Vee. And then I think most recently, since I'm in Australia, Canva is a big company. Melanie Perkins, she's one of the faces of the startup space in Australia, and you're sort of one of the angelists in that company, and you've consistently been just popping up. So that's how I came across you, Guy.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
Guy, please give a bit of an intro on sort of who you are and sort of the things that you're currently focused on. And I guess from there, I'll take rabbit holes based on what I think the audience might be interested in.
My name is Guy Kawasaki. I am currently the chief evangelist of Canva, and I used to be the chief evangelist of Apple. I'm also the host of the Remarkable People podcast, and I have just written a book with Madison Neismer. It's called Think Remarkable. And so that's what I do. I podcast, I evangelize Canva, and I write books.
What is a chief evangelist, Guy?
The word evangelism is from a Greek root, and it means bringing the good news. So what an evangelist does is bring the good news of his or her company's products or services. So in my first, role as an evangelist, I brought the good news of Macintosh, and now I'm bringing the good news of Canva, how it enables people to be better communicators because it has democratized design.
Huh. So when you say bring the good news, does it mean marketing? What does that mean?
I would say that it's the purest form of marketing because, to be successful as evangelist, you have to truly bring good news. You can't just slap lipstick on a pig. So, not every product or service is suitable for evangelism.
As a chief evangelist, were you sort of working full time, like 40-hour weeks for Apple or Canva at the current time?
At this stage in my life and career, I can't tell you that I'm like making insane hours anymore. I've been at Canva for 10 years, and I got to tell you, the most important time was at the beginning when I helped establish the company with the early adopters and the investment community. But generally speaking, I think the most powerful tool for an evangelist is the ability to demo his or her product. And that's what I did. I did a lot of demos in the early days.
I see. And as an evangelist, is your role demoing the product to investors and building relationships with investors and trying to get money?
I mean, honestly, back then you demoed it to anybody who had a pulse. I mean, it was, you just go out and you keep showing it and you keep talking to people. But, I was doing demos for primarily early adopters. Yes, some investors, but, Melanie and Cliff, they handled the investment mostly. I was doing demos for end users. I was just trying to build critical mass.
Huh. And then as the chief evangelist, what would your day-to-day be like? Would it be literally talking to customers one-to-one? Would it be creating events, trying to get people to your booth?
For me at this stage of my career, when I started doing this 10 years ago, it wasn't one-on-one so much. It was usually at large venues for big events. In my first stint as an evangelist for Macintosh, that was a lot of one-on-one or one-on-two or two-on-two kind of demos with software companies. But Canva doesn't require any kind of tech degree or tech expertise, so you could kind of demo it to anybody.
How many people were there working at Apple when you joined in, Guy?
My badge number was 5,041. So obviously some of those 5,040 people before me had quit, but that's the order of magnitude, 5,000.
Wow. And then were you hired by Steve personally, or were you just, how did you get brought into Apple?
Well, the true story is that I was hired because my friend hired me to be the second software evangelist. He was the first one, and I was the second one. And the long and the short of this story is that I was hired because of nepotism, because on paper, I didn't have the right educational degree. I did not have the right work experience. It's just, I was his buddy in college. That was my primary qualification.
And what were you doing prior to working at Apple, Guy?
Prior to working at Apple, believe it or not, I had a short stint in an educational software company. Like short, when I say short, I mean short, like 6 months. And before that, I was in the jewelry manufacturing business. So, completely unrelated to tech, completely unrelated to tech. Although I will tell you that starting in the jewelry business, and I worked for a manufacturer that sold jewelry to fine jewelers. So not to the customer, but to the retailer who sold to the customer. I really learned how to sell. And that's been a very, very valuable skill for the rest of my life.
Did working in the jewelry space, was that a big part of your life? How many years were you in that space for prior to getting into tech?
Yeah, I was in that space for maybe 5 or 6 years. Although, in this day and age, if you stayed at one job for 5 or 6 years, that's a lifetime for most Gen Z, right?
What is your advice for Gen Zs? Because like the Gen Zs, they're constantly getting new jobs every second, every 1 to 2 years. It feels like everyone's like, that's the best way if you want to climb the ladder, get bumps in your salary. And if you stay in one place, you don't get that opportunity, apparently.
I guess we will see what happens, but um, my I think at 2 or 3 years is a reasonable time, but 1 year or less is too short. And I think at some point, I completely support the theory of sampling and getting more data and more experiences. But at some point, if you have like 5 or 6 straight jobs, 1 year each, if I were the recruiter on the other side, I would say this person is unstable.
Any advice for like founders? Like if a founder wanted to build a team of employees that were 10 years old within the company, is it a numbers game? For every 100 employees, there might be one that stays for 10 years, or are there some retention? Are there key differences?
If you have 100 employees and only one stays for 10 years, something is wrong with you. I mean, I'm not saying it should be 99, but it should be way more than one. My goodness.
Interesting. And has that ratio decreased over the last 30 years? Because as you know, Gen Zs are jumping more often.
Listen, I don't have the data to give you a intelligent answer. I could not even guess. That's just, I don't want to just pull stories out of the air and give people the wrong impression. I really don't know. But let me address that question in a different way, which is to say that, let's say we had the data and it proves that people are staying longer or people are staying shorter, or there's more turnover or less turnover, whatever the data, the numbers don't lie. But I will tell you that I think the right perspective is not so much, what is the overall statistic? All that matters is your case, right? So like if everybody's turning over 1 or 2 years and you stay 5 years, it's okay. So you don't fit in the norm, but that's okay. So, it's like, let's say that you're looking for a job and you find out, you pick up the newspaper and the newspaper says unemployment is an all-time high, it's 9%. On the other hand, you could pick up the paper and it says unemployment is at an all-time low, it's 2%. Okay, so that's a great, interesting number for the politicians. But if you're looking for a job and you are in the 2% that gets a job, you're happy. And if you're in a 10% that, can't get the job, you're not happy. So, I mean, it's it doesn't matter what the big picture is, maybe except mentally, but if it's you that got hired in a very down market, hallelujah. On the other hand, the flip side is, what if it's you who doesn't get hired in a very hot market? You also suck. So, I mean, I'm thinking, just stop thinking about the big number. Just worry about number one.
Interesting. Yeah, because I was going to ask, like, with your experience working at companies like Apple and Canva, from the founders, from the CEO's perspective, what can they do to create an environment where people would want to stay for a long time?
Well, I mean, I think the reason why people have stayed at Apple so long is because, and I know some people who've stayed there 40, 50 years, it's because Apple truly enables you to do the best work of your career. And I bet you that's true of Canva too, that it actually expects you to do the best work of your career. And there are many companies where there are many barriers in front of people trying to do their best work. And so those are the companies that have, massive turnover. So I think number one is, get out of your employees' way and let them do the best work of their career.
Working with Steve at Apple and Melanie and her partner at Canva, do you see any similarities and do you see any differences? Anything that comes to mind?
I would say both Melanie and Steve are perfectionists. They really have high expectations for what the product is, how it's supported, how it's sold, all that kind of stuff. But there is one major difference between Steve and Melanie. Steve, let's face it, he was an asshole, and Melanie is not an asshole. Quite the contrary. And so, I mean, if that's one of the dangers of everybody admiring Steve Jobs so much, and they can't separate correlation from causation. So they look at him and they say, he was an asshole, he's so successful, I guess I should be an asshole. Well, not really. You should look at Melanie, and Melanie's not an asshole and she's successful, so maybe you should copy Melanie, not Steve.
And the team that Steve built that were all so invested in his visions, were they all people that sort of didn't mind him being an asshole, or were they all also assholes? What were his team looking like in that dynamic?
I would say that Steve was what you would call a mission-driven asshole. So there are two kinds of assholes. So one asshole is ego-driven. It's all about me, the glorification of me. I want the credit. I want to be, the focus of attention, blah, blah, blah. So that's like an ego-driven asshole. The mission-driven asshole is the person who wants to make the best computer, who wants to enable people to be more creative and productive, and he is not going to let anything stand in his way. So that's the kind of asshole that Steve was. And, that's not such, if you have to be an asshole, that's the kind of asshole to be.
Yeah, and I was wondering, like, say he worked closely with Johnny Ives, would him and Johnny Ives have similar personalities for that glue to stick, or would they have opposite personalities for that glue to stick?
You know what? I literally have never met John Ives, so I have no idea what kind of person he is.
Got it. Have you had any interactions with Tim Cook? Were you still at Apple
I
when they
also have not met him either. So, like you're talking to a guy who's over the hill, basically.
Guy, how long have you been doing the podcast? How old is the podcast now?
The podcast is about in December of 2024, it'll be 5 years old. So, call it 4.5 years. And this means we have more than 200 episodes, which is, more than 200 hours. And it's also about 5,000 pages of transcripts. And that's the background of the book. There's so much to listen to and so much to read. We decided we needed to narrow that down for people so they can get the inspiration and information from the book without spending 200 hours or reading 5,000 pages.
What was the catalyst to starting the podcast 5 years ago?
There's two versions of this story. So one version is that I figured out that I'm a very lucky person because I have access to remarkable people such as Jane Goodall. And so, when you have that, that's a blessing. And when you have that kind of access, and you also have the 40 years of, doing hand-to-hand combat on the front lines of companies, so you develop a perspective about what to ask. So I think I was, very fortunate to have the access and the knowledge to know what to ask. So I almost felt like I had a moral obligation to start a podcast. Now, the second story is that this is 5-6 years ago, and I was on a book tour for my then latest book called Wise Guy, and I met with these business podcasters, and I asked them, so how does podcasting work? And they said, well, we sell ads. We sell ad at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. And I say, well, how much do you get for each ad? He goes, 25,000 for the first one, 15,000 for the second one, 10,000 for the third one. So, I'm not a math major, but I can add that up and get 50,000. And I'm also not a math major, but I can take 50,000 and multiply by 52 and get 2.5 million. And I said, so you're telling me you make like 2.5 million? He said, well, actually, we make more because we have more than 52 episodes. So I heard that. I said, why am I writing a book? So much harder to write a book. I should be a podcaster. So that's the other side. That's the other story.
How do you go about growing a podcast to those numbers where you can get sponsorships for that large? Like, for example, I've been doing my podcast for the last 3 years. We have no sponsors. I do it because I just love talking to interesting people. I'm losing money each month because we have an editor.
Okay. So now, I love that you said that, because so let's say my podcast is 4.5 years old. The first 2 years I had a sponsor, the Remarkable Tablet people. And then, past their introduction, they really didn't need the kind of marketing I could offer. So for the last 3 years or so, I too have not had a sponsor. So I want you to know that I feel your pain, brother, because I have the same thing. And my podcast, we do a lot of work on it. We probably spend 10 to 15 hours on each episode. And, so it's 2 sound design engineers, Madison Neismer, producer, and, it's not, and we do a transcript, then we perfect the transcript. So it's not just a matter of turning on the record button, right? So I'm telling you that I've lost tens of thousands of dollars doing this podcast. So I don't know if you've lost that much, but I feel your pain. I understand the problem.
Yeah, because like people always throw around these big numbers, like, Joe Rogan, 100 million. But I've been doing this for 3 years. Luckily, I enjoy it, so I keep pushing through, and our burn rate isn't that much. We only probably spend maybe like 700 each month. So I guess we do the math over the last 3 years. But yeah, it makes no money at all. So when people ask, hey, how's the podcast doing? I make no money.
Yeah. But, well, first of all, I'm much older than you. So I have had a lifetime to accumulate money so that I can do stuff that doesn't make money late in my life. And I justify it to myself and my family that, listen, some people at my age, they buy boats, they buy airplanes, they buy cars. Actually, I do buy cars, but anyway. And, some of them have drug addiction, some of them are gambling addiction, some of them have mistresses, and I don't do any of that. So, podcasting is my vice. What can I say? There are a lot of worse vices than podcasting.
Guy, do you relate more to the startup founder or to the young, driven individual that's working at a company like Google and slowly climbing the ranks and having impact within a big tech company like Google?
Wow. I actually have kind of done both. And listen, there are pluses and minuses. I just spoke to Google yesterday. My talk at Google yesterday was the first in-person book event since the pandemic. And the day before, I spoke at Microsoft in Vancouver. And you know what? I mean, there's something really enjoyable about going to a big company with a nice office and cafeteria, like all that kind of good stuff, right? There's a feeling of teamwork and camaraderie and, big numbers, and you're kind of safe, although that might be a delusion. And On the other hand, I've also started companies, and you are master of your fate. All the upside is yours. You don't have to listen to somebody's boss's boss make some kind of decision. So I don't think it's easy to say one is better than the other. It just kind of depends on not only you, but also where you are in your life. So, to take an example, like if you were, you just had your first kid or your second kid, so you got two kids under 5, and let me tell you something, two kids under 5 and you're trying to do a startup, good luck with that. And at that point, I mean, if you were working for Google, you get like great medical care, you get all this kind of support, they like you catch the bus, and the bus has Wi-Fi, and you don't have to drive. And then if you do drive, they have a lot of chargers, and they change your oil in your car while you wait. Although if you have an electric car, you don't have oil, but I mean, I'm not stupid, I know that. But anyway, so there are some advantages to working for a large company. Yes.
That is so cool. Guy, when you talk about sort of you've accumulated a lot of wealth over your time so that you can do things like focus on podcasts, did most of that come from working at companies like Apple and Canva and getting amazing stock options? Or was it when you founded your own companies and you had exits on being a founder of a company you owned? Where did majority of it come from?
Well, I started several software companies. One of them was one of them was a venture capital firm that was classically funded by Sandhill VCs, including Sequoia. And I've also done with like angel investments, software startups. And to tell you the truth, I have not had this kind of liquidity event that you would have even heard of. So I've hit singles and doubles as an entrepreneur, uh, except Canva. Canva is like, I don't know, to use a baseball analogy, it is hitting a grand slam in the last game of the World Series, bases loaded, 2 outs, and you stand up and you point to where you're going to hit it, and you hit it out of the stadium. That's Canva.
That is so amazing. And when you joined Canva, was that the goal to have that grand slam out was that the intention, or was it going to be you're like, we'll see where this goes, maybe it's going to be one blip in my timeline?
Well, I mean, I think if you ask Melanie was always, her goal was to truly, truly build an enormously successful company. And she truly has done that. Now, you could say, oh, so I'm listening to this podcast, so from now on, I'm going to like follow around founders who believe that they're going to create the next unicorn, the next $40 billion company. Well, the problem with that theory is that every entrepreneur believes they're going to do that. It's just that Melanie was right. And listen, in my career, I've started several companies. I've backed a lot of companies, and every one of them thought that they were going to be the next Microsoft or the next, something like that, right? And let me tell you, I've only been right once, which is Canva. So, I mean, the lesson there is it's not how many times you fail. You just need to succeed once.
You're talking about Melanie's sort of strong belief on her vision and her company being this massive company. From the outside, it just looks like Canva is this amazing, easy to use Photoshop. It's like you use it, it's a subscription. It's so cool. You can now create templates, and it seems like a simple.
AI is built in.
Yeah. So like, was that always her vision, or does she have even a bigger vision than what I just shared? And was that bigger vision always from the beginning?
Well, I think if you asked her, she'd probably say that she wants Canva to produce every single graphic in the world. Everything that needs design in the world, she wants to produce. Yeah. And you know what? She's come a long way, baby. I mean, I bet you more people use Canva to create PowerPoint presentations than PowerPoint.
Yeah, because you're right. Like, I used to be an avid Photoshop user, but now like Canva does the job, and you're right, it does photo PowerPoints, and now it does video editing. I see that it's yeah, doing more and more.
It's truly amazing how the world has changed. And You could say, well, what if Adobe does a stripped down version of Photoshop, right? Or what if Microsoft does a stripped down version of PowerPoint? And I have to tell you, I've been in tech since 1983. I have never seen a company go downstream. Like if you have Photoshop, I've never seen a company be able to put out Photoshop Junior just by stripping stuff out. Or if you do Word, you strip stuff out of Word and make Microsoft Write or something. Right? I've never seen a company do that. I think the mentality that you have to recruit and develop when you have a Photoshop or a Word is you just want to make the most powerful tool ever. And then to turn around one day and say, guess what, guys? I changed my mind. I want you to make something really easy to use for anybody to use. You got the wrong team on board. They just cannot think like that.
What do you think Steve would have thought of Canva? Because Steve is a big fan of making things simple, making things like anyone could use an iPhone.
I gotta believe that Steve would love Canva.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll think so too. How long did you work with Steve?
I worked at Apple from 83 to 87 and 95 to 97. So now I was never a direct report in that 83 to 87 time frame, but so I call it 3 years or so. I consider it an honor to have worked for him. It was a great experience.
And then when you did 83 to 87, and then there was a break, and then you came back. What was the break, and what brought you back?
Well, the break was that I left to start a software company, and it did okay, but then in 87, excuse me, in 95, I left in 83. I I left Apple in 83, and then I came back. God, I got this all wrong. Oh my God. I started Apple in 83. I left in 87. And then in 1995, I came back to Apple. And then I left again in 1997. And the second time I came back, that was when Apple was supposed to die. So I was brought back as an Apple fellow to preserve the Macintosh cult.
And was 95 to 97, was this when John Scully was still the CEO, or was he kicked out and Steve was back in?
When I was, it's kind of fuzzy now, but definitely Steve Jobs and John Scully were both gone, and they were like Gil Amelio was CEO, and then Apple bought Next, and Steve was just on his way back in when I left.
Oh, so there was only a small overlap period of you and Steve.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, every time I leave Apple, Apple does well. That's a good. I hope it's not causation.
What's your thoughts on AI? Like, how has Canva been implementing AI? That's been like, you've been in the tech space for so long. What's your
I think that AI is the biggest deal I have ever seen in my career. I think it's bigger than the internet, bigger than personal computing, bigger than social media. And I really think that it's an absolute total game changer, maybe bigger than the Industrial Revolution. And I'm a constant user of it. And it helped me become a better writer. I used it a lot to write this book. And I don't hide that fact. I'm quite proud of that fact because I think as an author that my moral obligation is to write the best book that I can that will help my readers. And that's very different than saying, my moral obligation is to not use any tools, but to write a book, just, me and my fountain pen. I mean, that's not where I'm coming from. I'm trying to create the best book that I can. And, I hope you appreciate what I've done.
How did you go about using AI to help you write your book? Were you just like copying and pasting a page at a time into
I wish it was that
ChatGPT,
easy. No, no.
3 to 5?
The book was, I would say, 90% done when, ChatGPT even started, right? So listen, it certainly was not the case that I went to ChatGPT and I said, okay, so here's my prompt. I need a 75,000 word book that explains how to be remarkable, make 9 chapters in 3 sections and, 60 seconds later, I had my book. Fat chance, not even close to that. So I used ChatGPT primarily as a research assistant to help me find examples and help me find things to put in the book. I used Claude for summaries of in the last paragraph of every section is a summary of what happened in that section to kind of repeat the lesson. And I found Claude would be very good at summarizing the section that preceded it. So I use Claude like that. I use Quillbot to constantly check my grammar and to tighten my writing. I don't want people to get the impression that this is an easy book. This is not an easy book. And I also, I'll tell you something bizarre. So I love AI so much that I have a company that has created Kawasaki GPT. And at Kawasaki GPT, it contains the transcripts of all the podcasts. It contains the manuscript. It contains my YouTube videos. It contains my blog posts. So basically everything I've written or thought. And I put it all into this LLM. And so you can go to KawasakiGPT.com and ask me questions. And I promise you, Kawasaki GPT gives you better answers than I can give you. And I'll tell you something else. Lots of times people ask me for guest columns or guest posts, or they want a forward for their book, or they want a blurb or something like that, right? So guess where I go for my first draft? I go to my own LLM and I ask myself the question.
Guy, if I went ahead and put in, say, 5,000 hours worth of me talking into a LLM versus just ChatGPT, ChatGPT will still be able to give a better answer than me, right? But people would go to me if they want my voice, right?
I hate to tell you, but yes. I mean, like if people go to Kawasaki GPT and ask a question about, how can I foster the growth mindset? Okay. So yes, off the top of my head, I can give you a pretty good answer. But when you go to ChatGPT, when you go to Kawasaki GPT and ask that question, it's going to pull from Guy's writing and Guy's interview with Carol Dweck and Guy's interview with Angela Duckworth and Guy's interview with, Mark Manson and Guy's interview with Derek Sivers. I mean, it's going to pull from so many more data sources than my brain can assimilate in real time. So you will get a better answer from Kawasaki GPT than Guy Kawasaki himself. And I'm proud of that.
Yeah, because I was wondering, like, with all these custom GPTs that people can build where they can input their own data, why would someone want to ask that if they could just ask ChatGPT that has all the data?
That's a good question. I don't know. Well, I mean, when you have all the data, quote, all the data, yeah, I mean, in a sense, it becomes another chore for you because now you have to really decide about the answer you got from this LLM with, quote, all the data. Whereas if you went to Kawasaki GPT, you know, more or less know, okay, so this is Guy's perspective and Guy's guest perspective. It's not the whole world. So, I mean, if you ask Kawasaki GPT, is college necessary and sufficient to be successful in life? You will hear what I say as well as my guests. But, it would not include Peter Thiel or, people who are anti-college, for example.
Got it. How did you go about like compressing 200 hours plus worth of podcast interview into 250 pages?
180.
180, even less, yeah.
Well, I mean, I wrote this book so that Gen Z in particular can grok it, right? So listen, there are a lot of business books that take 200 pages to explain one concept. And, it's like, oh, make yourself this prototype that has all the minimum features that's necessary to be viable. It's called an MVP. Oh, I just explained a 200-page book. How much more you need to know, right? Make an MVP. Well, I mean, in my book, a concept like that would get 2 pages. And I think that's all you need. You either buy into that concept or you don't. And you don't need 50 examples.
What keeps you writing books, Guy? Do you feel like is Gen Zs, millennials, is books still something do you feel like it's, yeah, why do people write books nowadays?
Why do people write books? Well, a lot of them are writing it to help position and brand themselves as thought leaders and visionaries and all that. And I personally think that is a bullshit reason to write a book. I think you should write a book when you have something to say, not because you want some propaganda. I realize I've written 16 books, but in my mind, I've only written 16 books when I had 16 things to say. I didn't write it just to, become a thought leader. And I don't think of myself as a thought leader. I don't want to be a thought leader. I don't want to be a visionary or a guru. I just want people to buy my book and make a difference. That's all I care about.
Guy, with your podcast, are you, how do you go about scheduling guests, finding guests?
Oh, well, that's why I have Madison. So Madison is a producer. And, a lot of times people ask us, or book publishers ask us. And a lot of times the way you can get a really famous guest is because that really famous guest has just coming out with a book. So, this is a rare time where the guest is looking for interviews, right? So that's very helpful. We probably get asked 10 times a day to be on our podcast. And so like you say, let's say 10 times 240 days, that's 2,400 requests. We do 52. So, the statistics are like 1 out of 50 people who ask to be on our podcast get on our podcast. So I say with great pride, it's harder to be on my podcast than to get into Stanford or Harvard. So,
That's pretty
and
cool.
then listen, like I started off very, very fortunately because my first guest was Jane Goodall. And once you have Jane Goodall, the rest is kind of easy because nobody is going to question the quality of your podcast if you have Jane Goodall on it.
Tell me about that. How did you meet Jane Goodall? How did that relationship come to be?
Wow, that's a long story, but I'll give you a very, very quick version of this story. Okay. So I was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, in a lower middle class place. And I went to a public school. The public school system in Hawaii was not that great back then. So a sixth grade teacher convinced my parents to take me out of that school system and put me into a private school because she thought I had potential and could go to college. Thank you, God, my parents listened to her and made the sacrifice. So now I'm in this private school. I don't even remember why I did it or how it happened, but somehow I got into Stanford. So I go to Stanford and I meet Mike Boych, and we became best friends. And, a decade later, he hires me into the Macintosh division. So he's the guy who hired me despite my lack of background. And so now I'm in the Macintosh division and I did fairly well there. And I became pretty visible for my work with Macintosh as an evangelist. And then out of the blue, another 10 years later, this person sends me an email that says, Jane Goodall has agreed to do TEDx in Palo Alto, and I'd like you to be the person interviewing her. She didn't know me personally. She just knew of me because of my Mac work. And so I trace, and okay, so I interviewed Jane Goodall. We got to be very good friends. And I trace the fact that Jane Goodall is on my podcast and she wrote the foreword for this book to that sixth grade teacher. That's where it started. And so, if you're a teacher and you're listening to this, you ought to understand that, you may not be Steve Jobs or Jane Goodall or Elon Musk or, any of these billionaires or any of these like private equity, hedge fund billionaires, but man, to one kid, you can make a humongous difference and be remarkable.
I love that sort of cascade butterfly effect story you just shared. Um,
Yes.
it,
Yes, that
I,
is definitely the butterfly effect. And this is also the theory of Steve Jobs when he said in his commencement address that you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And if you think that in the sixth grade, I had this plan to meet Jane Goodall by getting out of that school and going to Stanford and then meeting Mike Boych and working for Apple and becoming well known so that TEDx would ask me and TEDx would ask me to interview Jane Goodall and she would be there. And that was the plan from sixth grade. Let me tell you something. You're on really, really hard drugs if you think that's true.
Given, the butterfly effect and sort of the looking back at the dots, you might not be like, I might not know why I'm doing this podcast, but in 20 years time, I'll look back that I needed to do this to get to the next thing, to get to the next thing. How has that affected?
20 years from now, someone's going to say, oh, 20 years ago, I listened to your podcast with Guy Kawasaki, and it was such a great podcast. And so I bought his book, and his book really helped me. So I figured out, oh, you know, this guy really has credibility. This guy, you, not me, this guy really picked out the right person to bring on his podcast. So now, now I'm reading his book, and maybe I'll make him the CEO of my company and invest $100 million in him. And you never know, man. You never know.
Yeah, with that whole thought and that whole philosophy, how has that affected like how you make decisions, how you say yes to things? Do you follow a gut feeling of like how do you go about knowing what to say yes to? Because anything could turn into that.
To tell you the truth, generally speaking, I always say yes. Right? I don't even know how I came to be on your podcast. I don't know if you contacted us. I don't know if you contacted me or Madison or the book publicist company found you or what. I have no idea. And until like I don't know, a few seconds, a few hours ago, I wasn't. I just said yes. I said, just anybody who wants me on their podcast, say yes. I don't care. You don't have to ask them how many downloads they get. You don't have to ask them who their prior guests were. I don't care. I don't care. I told them actually once in the meeting, I said, take an extreme example. Let's say a beautician has a podcast, and for some strange reason, this beautician with a beauty shop wants Guy Kawasaki to talk about Think Remarkable on her podcast. I'm telling you right now, say yes. I don't care if she's a beautician. I don't care if she only has 5 listeners. Just say yes, and it'll all work out.
Quick segue. When you went your primary school teacher, private school, then you got into college and you were studying at Stanford. What were you studying in Stanford, Guy?
I was studying at Stanford psychology. I was pre-med for about 1 week, and then I switched to psychology because psychology was the easiest major I could find. And I hate to break all the Asian stereotypes, but that's what I did. I majored in psychology. Now, going back to the Steve Jobs theory, you connect the dots looking backwards. So you could say, oh, Guy, you were so smart. You decided to major in psychology because you knew you would go into sales and marketing, and you didn't know the term yet, but the term is evangelism. So you had this plan, Guy. You would learn about social psychology to be a better marketer, right? And I would tell you, I hate to tell you, pal, but no, that was not the thinking. The thinking was, psych is an easy major.
Huh. And did you finish the degree? How long was the degree? And were you doing it at the same time working at the jewelry shop, jewelry business industry?
Well, no, I listen. I graduated from Stanford with a BA in psychology, and then the following year I went to law school and quit after 2 weeks. That's a whole nother story. And then the following year after that, I went to get an MBA at UCLA. And while I was there, I started working for the jewelry company part time. And then after my MBA was over, when all my friends were going to, JP Morgan and Accenture and McKinsey and Wells Fargo, I went to a small family held fine jewelry manufacturer in downtown LA. And it's the best thing I ever did.
I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to. I guess like what triggered you to finish your psych degree, go into law, try to get to UCLA and just study, even though you had a BA, what kept you still trying to study different things?
Well, I mean, I was young and dumb. What can I say? And I wasn't optimizing things. But that's been the story of my life. I have never sat down and, wrote out this strategic plan and strategic direction. I just fall in love with things and fall in love with podcasting, fall in love with Canva, fall in love with Macintosh. But believe me, I fell in love with about 15 failures too. So, love is blind, as they say.
Guy, what are your children like? Are they all like, did you focus on educating them, get them a lot of books, try to get them into sort of prestigious universities? What's the approach you took?
Listen, we have 4 children, and maybe with the first 2 or so, we were trying to have that kind of tiger mom, tiger dad attitude. But I think you kind of figure out after a few years that the thought that you can control your kid's life is a delusion. You have no clue. You have no control over that. So you just gotta, I mean, listen, I'm the son who quit law school. So if my son or daughter says I'm quitting school and dropping out and joining the circus, I mean, at an extreme, what am I gonna do? Like what? Disown them, cut them out of the will? What am I gonna do? And then in the book, there's a guy named Derek Sivers, and he talks about how he literally joined the circus and he became the ringmaster for the circus, and he like ringmastered, I don't know, 300 circus events. And guess what? Now he was this great TEDx speaker. And he says, listen, when you're a ringmaster of a circus, you learn how to perform and you learn how to speak. And a long time later, that helped him at TEDx. So who am I? I mean, I was counting diamonds. That's not exactly a straight path to tech.
What were your background? Like, what were your parents being like tiger parents? Because my parents, very similar, tiger mom, tiger dad, both from Vietnam, immigrants.
Listen, who knows, right? Human memory is not so good, but I don't ever think they were tiger moms and tiger dads for me. I went to a very hard school and I did very well, but it's not like they were driving me at, at 6 years old to my Kumon calculus class. And, it's not like I was, it's not like I was playing violin at age 2 and, I was going to be a prodigy and all that. I did not. Listen, I've talked to people who have had tiger moms. That's tiger dads. That was not my life. Not at all. But don't get me wrong. They valued education.
Were your parents immigrants that immigrated to Hawaii or?
Yeah, I'm 3rd-generation Japanese American. So the first generation was my parents' parents. And they came over to pick sugar cane and drive a taxi cab. And then my father, he was a fireman, and then he got his real estate broker's license, and then he became a state senator. And I'm the first generation to go to college in my family.
That's so cool. Yeah, and I guess in Australia, since the Vietnam Wars in the 1970s, a lot of the Asian community within Australia, it's all a lot of first generations, and hence the parents, fairly so, put a lot of pressure on the kids because they gave everything up to escape their country, to come to Australia, so they really want their kids to do well.
So wait, your parents did that or your grandparents?
My parents.
Wow. That's a story. And then they sacrificed so that you could go to school, right?
Correct. So
Yeah.
From their perspective, gave up their whole life to work a job, to earn money, to put me into tutoring, to get me into university, and me sort of dropping out to go with my business is of course they wouldn't be supportive of that. Of course they wouldn't.
And now you're a podcaster without a sponsor.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
But yeah, it's if I were in their situation, I'd be the exact same way to my kid. But like being the kid, I'm like, why? I'd love that support. I'd love for my parents to totally understand what I'm doing. But over time, it's changed. Over the last 6-7 years, as things gotten better and better, they sort of support-ish what I'm doing.
But I mean, you're making a living. This is not your only thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Makes sense. Another thing, with your podcast, have you implemented AI into your podcast? The other day I was playing around with this thing called Opus Clip where
the obvious place to incorporate AI would be to give them the raw audio and have AI do the transcript. And I tried that but I was not happy at all. And now I use a service called Rev. And Rev, at least that's what they say, Rev is using a human to take the pass at it. And now, for all I know, it's somebody in India, but that person in India probably has an undergraduate degree from Harvard, right? So the Rev manuscript comes in, transcript comes in very good. Now, I have tried to use AI to prepare for interviews. And sometimes I will stick an entire manuscript into ChatGPT and, say, okay, give me a summary of this book, because it's a lot of reading in my business, right? 52 weeks a year. I got to understand a new subject. So, but as far as asking AI, well, what should I ask this woman who was the first female CEO of IBM? I actually did this, right? Her name is Ginny Rometty. So I asked ChatGPT, what should I ask her? And ChatGPT comes back with questions like, oh, you should ask her what she thinks the future of technology is. That's such a bullshit question, that's the kind of question you hear on some, business channel on CNBC, that the person is like, they're just trying to prep for that 2-minute interview. And I have 60 minutes. I cannot ask questions like, what do you think the future of technology is? I mean, that's just not my style, if you've listened to my podcast. So I don't think AI is as good as me coming up with questions yet. Maybe next year it will be, but not yet.
Yeah, one thing I was wondering, like, will AI be able to replace creators? Because I was surprised how I could give them a 60-minute Zoom interview, and the AI Opus clip was able to create 33 60-second clips, and I'll go ahead and upload it to YouTube and see how they perform. But eventually, there's nothing stopping YouTube doing that in-house and just like creating clips out of all their existing content and constantly optimizing it for higher views, higher retention, and there would be no need for editors.
I tell you what, you try it and you let me know, because if it works for you, I'm gonna do it too. I mean, that's a big challenge to figure out. We got 60 minutes. What's the 60 seconds to pull out? And that's a completely manual process. So yeah, if it works out for you, tell me how you did it, because I will do that too. But ultimately, Kawasaki GPT will be my avatar, right? And it's going to have my facial expression. It's going to look like me. It's going to sound like me. It's going to have my pidgin accent. It's going to have, people won't be able to tell it's not Guy. And then they won't be able to tell it's not Guy. And then it's using the Guy data set. So in a sense, I'm going to be immortal.
And like,
it's a scary thought.
Yeah, like the fact that you can even put dates to it, and if you have 5 years worth of data, they can see how Guy has changed over the last 5 years and guess, like if you passed away, knock on wood, you don't pass away but if they kept the growth trajectory on the next, they could predict how you'd sound like in 10 years time. Like, crazy, right?
Ah. Okay, so listen, I gotta get going. Okay, I have something to do with my son. So
Yes. Last two questions we wrap up this podcast with. One, any recent discoveries you've been implementing to your day-to-day life, Guy?
any recent discoveries? Well, about a year and a half ago, I went almost completely deaf. So I've been using a cochlear implant. A cochlear implant is a miracle. It takes you from being deaf to hearing lousy. So that's a game changer for me, cochlear implant. And it's from Sydney, Australia.
I think I know that company. My sister's studying to become an audiology. So I might clip this and send it to her and see if she has any other pointers that I could send over.
Oh, yeah. So I use a cochlear implant from Cochlear, the company in Sydney.
Yeah.
And yeah, it truly is a game changer. And, maybe someday they'll figure out how to use stem cells, or I don't know, whatever the cause of hearing loss is. But I'm running out of time.
Yeah. And then
Okay, what's the second question?
The second one, what's your goal and focus for the next 6 months? And I also want to hear about your bookshelf. That's a cool bookshelf you have.
My goal in 6 months is I want to be able to hang 10 on a surfboard, but I've been saying that for 10 years now. So I'm not, I have a growth mindset, but I still have not accomplished that. Listen, I want this book to be the de facto little life coach book for young people. I want parents and grandparents to buy this book for their kids and grandkids as they graduate high school and college. And I think it really is a great guidebook for how to live a remarkable life. And that would make me just ecstatic. There are some books that just keep selling and selling, and it's not even the royalty, because like, I'm not going to live forever, so it's not going to matter to me. But I want people to say, Guy empowered me and Guy helped me make a difference. That's my goal. Okay.
And the butterfly effect. Guy, where can people find more of you, follow you? Where's the best platforms for them to get the book as well?
Well, the book is, if you can't find my book online, you're not going to be remarkable, because you clearly don't know how to search. I mean, you should just give up. I mean, and if listen, my email is guykawasaki@gmail. If, how many authors will tell you their email on a podcast? And I'm most active on LinkedIn, I would say. So LinkedIn and Instagram, probably.
We'll link everything below. Thank you so much for your time today, Guy. I love how...
All right. Thank you. All the best to you.
Humble.
Take care.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Hope you guys got some value from this episode, and I'll see you guys next week. Peace.